Okay, confirm that the live stream started. So this is the Audit Governance meeting, 27th of July. So we'll move to the first item on the agenda, which is the election of chair for this year. So can we have nominations for chair?
I'd like to propose James Fry.
And can we have a seconder?
Yeah, I second that.
And can we have, with show of hands, agreement for that?
I'm allowed to vote for myself.
Confirm Councillor Fry, the chair for the year.
Thank you very much indeed. The next item is election of vice chair. I've had email correspondence with Councillor Latif, but he's not yet here. I know he's a doctor. He often arrives a bit late. But may I, subject to him in person confirming it, propose Amir Latif as a vice chair? Any seconders? Thank you, Councillor Aziz. Any other nominees? No? Those in favour? Thank you very much indeed. So yes, apologies for absence and substitutions.
Okay, we have apologies from Councillor Korais and it's substituted by Councillor Aziz. And we have apologies from Councillor Monconje and substituted by Councillor Prassel.
Thank you very much indeed. Any declarations of interest from the committee members? No, thank you very much. I don't know how many of you have had a chance to look over the minutes of the last meeting, but did anyone have any comments, corrections on the minutes? If not, I propose that we approve them as correct. So I take that as assent. Thank you very much. Now, 2 points just before we begin. There is, if you look at the agenda, we have confidential items at the end. So at that point, we will have to go into confidential session, and I will at that point propose that we end the live streaming. But anyhow, there is a form of words I would have to say at that point. So that will come at the end. In fact, Scott Warner from the investigations team, I hope he can stay until then because his work was part of that particular item. Otherwise, I'm going to suggest that we stick with the agenda as we have it here. And so, yes, one final point I was going to mention. I need to leave by 7:30. And I'm hoping we don't yet have, unless they're on Zoom, I think the external audit item should be fairly quick. I just want a very quick summary about how they're getting on in terms of the timetable. So I'm hoping that with that, we might be able to stick to that particular deadline. I'm sure we'd all be grateful for that. So maybe I could invite you, Scott, briefly to introduce your report.
Certainly, Chair. So the aim of the report is to summarise the performance of the counter-fraud team for the financial year 21-22. What I'll do is provide a brief summary of content and then invite any questions you may have afterwards. So in at the deep end on table 1, page 2, you'll note that the team fell short on 3 of our 5 targets in the year, and I'll give some details to why that was. The first one was the number of council properties recovered and applications stopped. The pandemic continued to have a fairly detrimental effect on this area of work. Remote working and periods of government restrictions were partly to blame. And so the team were only able to recover 5 council-owned properties during the period, properties that were being misused. That target is made up of 2 components. We normally achieve that target with an even split of properties recovered and applications stopped, and we were still able to stop 7 fraudulent and irregular applications for housing from being progressed. One of the other main areas of falling short on performance was the fact that I had to divert a large part of the team to help with the administration of COVID business grants. That work featured front and centre to our operations over the course of the year, and that was to the detriment of some of the other work that we get involved with. Our right to buy target, that's a disruption target, that was down. We were on track with that throughout the course of the year, but there was a spike of new applications received towards the end of the year, so that skewed that statistic somewhat, unfortunately. And the other target we fell short on at the foot of the table was trading income. And that was, it's because that's a struggle to engage in the same level of business development activity that we're used to in previous years with the restrictions in place and various lockdowns, etc. So a lot of the events we'd attend physically were held virtually, and that limited the opportunities we had to get involved with potential clients and engage with them. In addition, other organisations were still being cautious about their operations, given the financial outlook as it was in the middle of the year. But you'll notice the two remaining targets were exceeded in quite a big way. Table 2 shows a breakdown of the areas where these values were achieved. And you'll note that the last entry, which is over the page on 4, COVID business grants is where the team again excelled in protecting public funds over the course of the year. Now, that was down to the verification checks that we devised. And as a result, nearly £4.2 million worth of business grant money was not paid out, where it otherwise would have been had it not been for the checks we implemented and the actions of the team. So that brings our grand total to just over £6.8 million, which is still great and something which I hope demonstrates ongoing value for money from the counter-fraud team. Section 5 sets out the fact that we ran our 6th annual fraud conference, and it was a welcome return to the town hall after being virtual the previous year. We had more than 150 in attendance. And that was the first time we delivered the event jointly with our shared service partners, Reigate and Banstead Borough Council. We produced a fresh new brochure, which gives details of the services available from both authorities and the staffing, and that can be found at Appendix 1. As a point to note, we're going to be hosting again in the town hall this year on the 17th of November, and you're more than welcome to come along. Appendix 2 details the internal investigations that took place in the period, so I'll deal with that one last. Paragraphs 11 to 14 explain some of what we do from a commercial perspective. We are known externally as the Oxford Investigation Service, and we're now a very established brand with a reputation for quality. Paragraph 15 to 22 sets out the details of our partnership working over the course of the year, and you'll note that we worked with 23 different organisations in one guise or another. It's not just Oxford that we deliver value for money for. We also achieved £2.1 million for our partner organisations, recovered 4 social housing properties for them, and provided a number of training courses during the period. Paragraph 22 details the shared service arrangement we've got with Reigate and Banstead, and the partnership continues to gather momentum. And one particular highlight I wanted to note is the piece of work we delivered for Riverside Housing in the year, where we helped to bring about the 2nd highest ever unlawful profit order from the investigation of one of their an illegal sublet in one of their properties. That attracted national press, and we developed a press release jointly with Riverside, and that can be found at Appendix 3. And to summarise, the last part of the report demonstrates the financial effectiveness of the team of delivering more than a 1,500% return on investment in the course of the year. Happy to take any questions.
As always, we need to burnish your gold star, but I'm sure there are questions. Ros, would you like?
You mentioned congratulations to the team first. Thank you. It reminded me about the microphone. You mentioned Appendix 2 and you mentioned Appendix 3, but I'm not sure that I can see those in the papers here. So
they were provided, I believe. No 2. Is there not?
And I can't find them in the ones that I printed off either too. So perhaps they could be sent out separately, because I would like to see those.
Is one of them, I'm pretty sure, is the confidential appendix. I think that we will cover at the end.
Right, okay, fine. So it's Appendix 3 then. Okay, right, thank you. Thanks very much.
If I may, I had just one or two questions. It's always impressive, you show who your staff are, and you also, in your publicity, show Reigate and Banstead. When you show the numbers, the revenues that you've saved and earned, is that solely for Oxford City? I don't quite understand how the joint working proceeds.
Okay, yeah, happy to elaborate. So yeah, the figures I've reported today are specifically for Oxford City Council, with a mention to what we've done for other authorities. In terms of the shared service arrangement we've got with Reigate and Banstead, that's a resilience arrangement where we provide resources and expertise to each other in times of need. Now, although that partnership started in early 2020, the flow of that resources has been one way. So we've been providing to Reigate and Banstead and helping them out. Which is fine because that derives an income for us. But they've got a different set of specialisms and a lot of experience in those specialisms where there's gaps in ours and vice versa. So we can draw on each other's experience and expertise and resources.
Just to follow up on that, because I'm assuming, am I right, that you are preeminent now among local authorities in the sector? And you mentioned about conferences, but I think we probably all received from you an email about a Birmingham, was it a Birmingham conference? That's an extra one you're putting on. So is that another string to your bow? Is that mainly to promote yourselves, so it's also a revenue earner? Which is it? It's both, is it?
So yeah, the Birmingham event took place in May this year, so it was outside the scope of this report because I purely confined it to the last year. So that will feature in a mid-year update or the next annual report. So that was born out of the idea and of a conversation that took place at the last conference, suggesting there was a gap in the market for a Midlands-based event of a similar nature, and we delivered that one with 2 private sector partners who are suppliers of ours. It was very popular, had a very good attendance, considering it was in the inaugural event, and we're planning to deliver it again next year. So yeah, very similar in format.
Thank you. And if I may, one last. When you mention about that you have blocked and you have a form of words, I haven't jotted it all down, related to COVID business support grants. And I understand that some were fraudulent, some were irregular, some were duplicitous, but then there were 2 other categories that you mentioned, which I think may have just been errors and so on. Do you have any indication of how much, if you like, were on the wrong side of the law? And how many of that 4.17 million was just people not filling in forms correctly or simply thinking they were eligible, but they were not?
Yeah, so the data for that is still being collated in the returns that we have to put back to central government. So I'll be able to report on that at a later stage.
Thank you, because I'd like to suggest that at some point it would be good to publicise that, given the publicity generally about all the scams related to COVID and PPE procurement. Be nice to show what one service has been able to do. So to have it clearly split between the errors and the, on the wrong side of the law. Sorry. I was just going to say, in your absence, you have been voted in unanimously as vice chair. Is that acceptable? Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes, Duncan.
It's just a quick one. I'll declare an interest as my son was Magnus Lagerhall. But you've got Alexi back. You had Magnus as apprentices. Are you continuing with apprenticeships or not?
We are. We've been very active in the last 3 apprentice intakes, and we've had 2 exceptional apprentices, your son being one of them. And we had an apprentice this year. Unfortunately, she didn't make the grade. We extended a probation a number of times, provided much support as we possibly could, and every opportunity to improve. But we think our interests were elsewhere. So we are now going out for another apprentice because we do want to keep nurturing young talent and bringing the next generation into the profession, which is otherwise quite hard to break into.
Other questions? I mean, if not, I would like again to congratulate your team. You know, it's been difficult external circumstances and you've still done a very good job. As I said, it would be nice to note how much of your COVID business grant prevention, you know, was on the side of stopping illegality, because I think we should publicize that. But otherwise, may we as a committee please approve the report and then wait for you for the final confidential session. I take that as unanimous. Thank you. So we come on to the risk management report. Now I'm assuming, well, it's sitting in front of me. Bill Lewis, would you like please briefly to introduce the report?
Yes, I will, Chair. So this is the quarterly risk management report for Q1. If I skip to section 8, which is about the corporate risk register, number of red risks on the corporate registers increased to 5. There were 2 formerly amber risks, which have increased to red, and they're terrorism and delivery of services by external suppliers. And there are details of those 2 risks within the body of the report lower down. It actually goes over onto the following page. So yeah, this is just around, I think, you know, sort of increasing instability in the global climate regarding terrorism, and concerns really about external partners in leisure centres. So yeah, those ones have been escalated, as I say. Service risk registers. Again, we've got changes in the number of red risks. It's reduced to 6. There are 2 former red risks, planning, partnership changes and regeneration support team capacity have reduced to amber because of mitigation controls. But 1 former amber risk in community services has increased to red. And again, there's details of that within the body of the report, page 42 of your agenda. On business continuity, I mean, nothing's really moved on that from before. We're still kind of almost in a business continuity situation, in that, yeah, it's almost business as normal, but we've kind of continued doing some of the bits we were doing during COVID. We have dropped off the use of the horse path depot, because we've proven that we can actually work from home if necessary. So I suppose those are the key changes on the business continuity. The other section is on the risk management group, and this section covers things which the risk management group has done over the last period. So there's a fair amount of items in there which I won't read out. I'll leave it to yourselves to ask questions on them if necessary. So if I pass that over to yourselves for any questions.
Very, very nice and succinct. I have some questions, but before doing so, I'd like to invite the committee if they have any specific questions. Amir.
Thanks, Bill, for talking us through the report and presenting it. I just wanted to ask the risks, the corporate risk register, the ones that you were talking about that have been added. Terrorism, obviously economic growth has been there for a while. I know it was discussed at one of our other financial panel meeting. It seems as though we don't have a lot of control over those as a council. You know, there's a little bit of control that we have as what happens with the you know, the economic strategy within the city, but you know, whether we have a recession or not, really that's probably outside of our control, unfortunately. And the same with terrorism, and of course these are important risks, but I just wonder, you know, normally if I see a risk register and there's something red, part of the purpose of highlighting it in red is that actually as a committee or as a council we should then look to
action that and try and mitigate the risk. But I'm just wondering whether that's, realistic, or whether these will therefore forever stay red and there's not a lot we can do about it. Just for your thoughts on that, please.
But just before Bill responds, I was going to comment, if one looks back over years of this committee, in fact, there are now, like you look at how, as you go through the red risks, there are at least comments on what, if anything, the council can influence, which was introduced at this committee's request. So there is an attempt to do that, but still I will go back to Bill and see how he responds, because some of these I suspect are seen as generic risks over which we have little control.
Well, indeed, Chair. I mean, there's limited control over these risks. But as you say, it is actually identified in the report in sort of narrative form. I think economic growth you can deal with at the edges, as you say, through having an economic strategy and delivering to that. But yes, we can't control if there's a national recession. So that doesn't take away from the fact that it is a red risk to the council and the council's area. I think probably the difference is because the council is a public organisation. It probably looks at things that are sort of dangers and effects on the public and on the area, slightly different to a private company, because we have our statutory responsibilities that we have to operate within. So I think really you'd always have this at the council, and so certainly in my experience you have risks which you do have limited control over, but yet you want to keep them on the register to remain cognizant of them. And the same sort of thing with terrorism. We can't actually directly prevent one, but we can work with the police. We can put in measures if there's any events which we're organising that will seek to mitigate that. So I hope that answers the question.
As I understand it, I mean, emergency planning kind of lies at the county council level, but I mean, there are a number of issues like the recent extreme heat, obviously in the winter, possibly extreme cold when people can't afford their fuel bills. You've got, whether it's climate or supplier, issues again with food poverty. How do these get caught up? How do these get put into a risk register? Where do they lie? Because there are other councils planning to have warm centres in the winter, for example. I mean, where does this kind of thinking kind of lie in your thinking, I suppose?
And could I again use my prerogative to add to that? One of the things I'd noted, you have negative impacts of climate change, but the focus of the discussion, admittedly brief, is essentially on flooding and flood alleviation. And I would have expected, and partly the point that Duncan's just made, I'm sure the committee would agree, I would have expected more about housing, where we do have a role, housing standards, transport to the extent we can influence it. I mean, those sorts of issues, I mean, they are negative effects of climate change. It just, I would put the emphasis in a rather different area. And Shaista.
Yeah, thanks, James. And just to sort of follow on from that as well, I noticed that on the equalities impact, it says there are no equalities impacts arising directly from this report. So again, just to connect it with the points made by colleagues before I've spoken, I'd just like to challenge that as well. Thank you.
Okay. Well, on the climate change one, just to make it clear, these aren't my risks. I'm reporting on the corporate ones, first of all. But on the climate change, it does actually recognise zero carbon as being an issue. I accept that it doesn't say anything about potential to deal with things through housing, and I shall I'll report that back and see if that actually needs to be referred to on here. Answering the equalities impact part, the report itself doesn't have equalities impacts because the report isn't actually deciding to do anything. Some of the things it's reporting on might themselves have equalities impacts, and in fact you would expect that if there was a report actually on the economic strategy, then there'd be an equalities impact around that. But we're not actually affecting equalities through just reporting on risks to the council, and so that's the reason for that part of the report.
Thank you. Any other? Yes, Ros.
Thank you. Sorry to go back to the negative impacts of climate change, but yeah, I would agree that we should actually sort of see more about something that the council does have in place, which is standard of housing, that we can do something about and actually take it to a much higher standard. And also our own buildings as well too, which is important. We've got several community centres which could have solar panels put on. In fact, I suggested that a few years back, in fact, before it was being built on a local one near me, and that was dismissed. I also suggested grey water, and that was dismissed as well, which could have been put in at much cheaper rather than retrofitting later. We've also got gas boilers in our community centres, which is ridiculous. That's costing local voluntary groups that run those community centres for the council and for residents a lot of anguish at the moment with the bills, racing upwards as they are. And a lot of concern. So I'm also a little bit puzzled by the reference to the Seacourt and Redbridge Park and Rides sites. Yeah, I would actually say that's a negative impact on climate change, encouraging people to drive their car there and rather than getting a bus from an original destination. So just a bit curious about that one. So my eyebrows went up at that. Can I ask while I'm speaking, is that all right, Chair? Yeah, another question. Yes, looking down through the current risks and where they're registered as such. Yes, recognising the red ones, but there's quite a lot in the amber section. We have 49 in Q2. 50 in Q3, 48, Q4, Q1 again is down to 47, which is the lowest. But I don't really see much text about those, and wondered if perhaps you could just mention a little bit about some of the amber ratings risks that you've got, which are quite high.
I can't, I'm afraid, because I don't have the details in front of me. There's obviously quite a lot of them, and I would have to actually look through, but certainly we can provide some details of those. We don't actually report on those here because the actual report to audit and governance is to pick off the red risks and leave it to service heads to deal with the amber ones. That's just been the way we've done it. I'm not sure that really the committee would necessarily want to sit through a report which have got 47 amber risks. However, we could potentially, for next meeting, put the service risk registers on the committee agenda, if that would help.
I mean, could I just suggest, I believe, but it's totally illegible in the printed version and even on screen. We do have all kinds of pretty colours, and we have that, I'm not sure it's called an appendix, but at the back of that section, there is a long list of various risks and so on, which I hope maybe Lucy can confirm. They may well answer the point that...
Could I perhaps just elaborate on my question? Was basically, are there any that are regular ambers that you have any concerns about? Let's put it that way.
There are regular ambers. The risk management group does review risk registers, and if there are risks on the service risk registers that the group feels actually are either rated wrong or indeed need to be escalated onto a corporate risk, then the group will recommend that. So that's the sort of control over the actual ratings within the registers for service level.
Thank you. Duncan.
Yeah, okay, labouring the point just one last time. Out of those 47, 48, whatever it is, 50, let's just call it 50. Yeah. There are going to be 5 at least which are edging. I mean, some are more amber than others, or whatever. You know, more deeply hued towards red than others. Maybe we should have a briefing note on those, just giving us a heads up that, oh, you know, a quarter or 2 down the line, one of those ambers is going to go red on us, just to give us, you know, a bit more background, a briefing note on it.
Okay.
That's okay. I take that to be the mood of the committee, and Nigel Kennedy's nodding his head as well. So could I make then, I mean, unless there are more specific comments, could I make 1 or 2 just comments? I feel there is a sense that how the negative impacts of climate change have been described doesn't capture everything in particular that the council has some ability to influence. I was going to suggest, but no one's actually raised it, but the delivery of services by external suppliers is veering into a confidential commercial area, I believe. But it would be good if members of this committee could have maybe a note before our next meeting, because I think some decisions are going to have to start to be made quite soon. So I don't want to discuss it here, but maybe we could just note that for future. And I think there's some agreement. I know we only have 3 colours, but maybe where things are veering towards the red, that would be helpful, just from our point of view. Finally, if I could suggest a risk that audit's not really mentioned in any of these papers, to my knowledge. I mean, not just yours, elsewhere, which we know all about ICT and the QL system. I'm just surprised that ICT isn't down. I would put it as a red corporate risk myself. I mean, maybe it's also a service risk, but anyhow, I feel, and I don't know, at some point I'm looking at Nigel Kennedy, are we going to get a report to this committee on the whole QL experience?
Short answer to that question is yes. The consultants are still undertaking or finalising the report, actually, so it's not quite ready, but there's every intention that report will be circulated to certainly audit and governance, then possibly to wider members as well, actually. I suppose just to answer the question on some of those ambers, basically, I think just to confirm that we will provide more information in the report, the next report, just to pick up some of the flavour of those key amber ones that you refer to, actually. It is in the papers, but I think they're pretty difficult to read basically on laptop, and even more so when your laptop has just died on you, actually. So, but we'll get that in the next report, I think, actually. Yeah.
Thank you. So maybe with those comments, maybe we could note this, and I'm pleased to see, I'm not aware of having had a section on the risk management group, which I think just highlights 2 examples, Blackbird Leys and the Gasworks Bridge. But I'm glad to know there is more attention focused on this. But with that, may we, I guess we have to note this report, is that correct? Is that okay? Thanks very much. So now we come to the external audit, where I believe, is that on Zoom? Hello, Francesca. I gather you're doing it for us today. Could you, since, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, I feel this is very much just to tell us you're embarking on it, and maybe for this committee, what we'd most like to know is how is progress towards your deadline for this year, so we don't get slippage like last year.
Okay, so I thought I'd just give a brief introduction myself and then run through the key points and specifically on the timeline, and then if you have any questions, you can come back to them. So I'll be the assistant manager on the audit for the 21-22 financial year. I'll be replacing Chandrika, who was the previous assistant manager. The rest of the audit team remains consistent with the prior year, so Maria will be the partner, Adrian the senior manager, and Charmaine the senior. If I can direct your attention to page 53 of the report, we set out the risks. So the first 5 risks set out in the report remain consistent with the prior year. So we've identified a fraud risk on inappropriate capitalisation of revenue expenditure due to fraud or error. This is in line with ISA 240 and is no change from the prior year. The second risk is identified under valuation of land and buildings linked to property, plant and equipment and investment property. This has been picked up as a significant risk due to the inherent nature and the complexities involved in the assumptions involved in the estimation techniques. The third risk we've identified is COVID-19 grants. As discussed earlier in the committee meeting, there's been a number of COVID-19 grants that have been provided to the council over the past 2 years. Some are pass-through grants, so the accounting treatment of these would differ. And in the prior year, I think we identified some issues around these, which was partly causing the delay in the audit. So that remains an inherent risk on the plan. The next risk is the pension liability, so similar to valuations, but this is identified as an inherent risk. We have identified a risk around the pension liability valuations due to the complex judgments and assumptions used in the calculation of the pension liability. And the fifth risk outlined on the report is the group consolidation. So as noted in the audit plan, the council group structure is expanded over recent years, and this is added to the complexities of the consolidation. Also in year, there has been a restructure in relation to one of the subsidiaries, which has now become a limited liability partnership, so that adds further complexities. As this plan was an indicative plan, as the planning procedures across the audit have continued, we've identified 2 additional risks. One is in relation to the minimum revenue provision. So in November 2021, the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities issued a consultation with respect to the minimum revenue provision. The scope of the consultation was proposed to change the capital financing regulations to address the issues that some authorities are not adequately complying with the duty to make an MRP charge. This is mainly linked to MRP not being charged on investment assets and capital loans. So due to increased scrutiny and result of the consultation, we have identified that as an area of focus on the audit. And the last risk will be identified as an inherent risk on the plan relating again to ISA 240, but this risk is specific to the subsidiaries where we believe that the risk in improper revenue recognition will manifest itself within cut-off. If I can direct you to section 3 of the report, page 67, this just notes that the VFM planning is not concluded at the time of this report. Currently, we have not identified any risks of significant weaknesses at the council, but we will update the committee should we identify any. And then in terms of the timeline, if you just turn to page 80 of the reports pack. So the original planning was due to start in April-May time, but due to the delays and sign-off of the 2021 audit, this has now been pushed back to July. We are making progress on the planning stage of the audit, and we were due to move into the year-end visit towards August time, July-August time. The receipt of the draft accounts we were originally expected around the beginning of July. This has now been pushed back to the beginning of August in relation to a system issue, which Bill has flagged to the audit team. As set out on page 57, the overview, we are still planning to conclude the audit by the deadline of the 30th of November, but due to the points mentioned, the sign off of the 2021 audit and the delay in receiving the 21-22 audit draft statements, we will have to keep updates to the committee on whether this is still feasible. And the last section I was just going to point you to is page 87, which is the fee. So the additional fee for 2021 audit is still being determined, and we'll discuss with management before submission is made to PSAA. And let me just.
Thank you. I think Nigel Kennedy, maybe you can also mention MRP that was raised there and progress on the audit. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in terms of the progress on the audit, and the delay that Francesca refers to in terms of the system is in respect of QL, and I think that's well tracked in terms of the problems we've experienced with QL in respect to 21-22. It has put us at least 5 to 6 weeks behind, basically, in preparation of the accounts where we would like to be. So, and you know, as was said previously, there will be a wash-up audit, basically, undertaken by consultants, which will come to committee to explain more about that. So I won't go into detail, but that's the reference to that. In respect of the MRP, I mean, members may be aware that this council was absolutely proactive in terms of getting ahead of the game and speaking to LGA and even DLAC actually in respect to the MRP consultation. We were lobbying DLAC before the consultation even came out, actually, when I was made aware through a source that I won't disclose, actually. But banging on the door of DLAC and saying this is absolute nonsense. Their initial proposals would have had a significant impact on the council. And through the lobbying and the work of Bill Lewis in particular, in terms of work with LGA and DLAC, actually, I think we managed to get to a position where we are, I wouldn't say entirely happy, but it is a better financial position than we were certainly in before that consultation was launched. So I'd like to think that the LGA and DLAC listened to what we said, actually. And as I say, we got a result. So yeah, welcome the inspection by external audit in this area. There are a number of local authorities, or certainly were a number of local authorities that were not applying the rules as they should have done, basically. And so I welcome the scrutiny by external audit in that particular area. But yeah, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions on this? Ros.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? You can. Okay, good. Right. There's no mention here about the SIPFA looking at having independent members for an audit and governance committee. Is that something that you'd want to comment on? I know that the county has got an advert out for 2 at the moment.
I would have to consult with Adrian and Maria probably on that one, but I can come back to you.
Certainly something I've spoken to Maria and Adrian about before at the city, from the city council.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
I think, and maybe Greg might comment on it, I think it is mentioned briefly in the papers for internal audit. I mean, it'll affect both audits, yes. And I know there's been various correspondence, so we meant to pay for this and all the rest. The last I heard, there was a suggestion this was someone doing it pro bono, which didn't sound to me terribly likely, but still. Are there any other questions or comments? I suppose the key thing from a council point of view is with the delay that has been mentioned, thanks to QL, does that mean that if we look at the timetable on page 80, which currently was looking at some point in August as an interim audit, does that mean in practice that slipped back to September? Is that how I should interpret the comments?
Per discussion, so the audit team and the finance team are having regular catch-ups on a weekly basis to track progress. Per discussion that we had with Bill on Tuesday, I think they're still on track to provide us the statements for the beginning of August, so we should be able to start the year-end visit hopefully towards the beginning of next week. Bill, correct me if anything's changed in the 2 days since.
No, that is certainly our intention, is to provide the statements. It'll be at single entity level rather than group accounts. Mm-hmm. And also provide some key working papers so that the audit team can get working on those. And we've been working with Ernst & Young about this, and we're going to be provided with a list of key areas that they can look at sort of and kind of get them going on the audit and start ticking things off. So we're certainly working closely together, and we will continue to do so.
And that's excellent. I mean, I'm going to suggest that with an eye on where we are at the time of our next meeting, which I hope is getting very close to having some kind of draft of the accounts. I mean, I think we're asked to note the report. Does the committee agree with noting the report? Sorry, one comment.
Sorry, Chairman. Page 67, which talks about value for money, which is also really important, I guess, for everybody. And it mentions that they're not satisfied the council has made proper arrangements for securing economy, efficiency and effectiveness in its use of resources. And the code requires that we should refer to this by exception in the audit report on the financial statements. So is that for 2021 or for 21-22? Just so that I know which, so I'm clear.
Just trying to find the section of the report.
There's page 67.
Page 67.
I mean, it's you mentioning it's an area of
Oh,
focus,
we are not essential.
and it talks about you
Oh,
updating.
I think
the-
so at the time, yeah. So should we identify, and I think we will report by exception in the audit report, but we haven't identified anything yet because we haven't completed the procedures.
Just to confirm, that's 2021, 22.
21, 22, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, with that clarification, may we now please note the report? I take the nods as being assent. Thank you very much, Francesca. Now we proceed, and Greg is the last person standing without COVID, I think, in your team. So you've come to present it. So we can maybe go, you can lead us through 9, 10 and 11 before we come to the confidential items. Over to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. Good evening, everyone. So the first report we have is our annual report, which we produce every year. It summarises our work. We've only got 8 reports for 21-22. So it's a slightly light programme. That was at the council's request to defer a number of audits, but we've got good coverage. So we've done a number of audits around the finance in particular, but across a range of different areas. Overall, we're giving a moderate assurance, which is the level you'll be familiar with. It's our sort of second highest level. I think that reflects on the whole, good outcomes from the report. So 7 out of 8 of the reports had either substantial or moderate assurance. The only one that didn't is the report that's on the private agenda, bit of the agenda. So we'll talk about that later. We're also noting in general some good progress in clearing off old recommendations. Just a couple of points I'd also make. I mean, firstly, as we say in the report, the council clearly has financial challenges ahead, and it's going to be entering into some bumpy waters, as are a number of local authorities over the next few years. So we're going to have to keep a close eye to ensure the control environment isn't adversely affected as you go through that period. The other thing I'd just mention is that in terms of the companies, your subsidiaries, the plan is to bring something back to your next meeting where we will summarise the work we've done there to give you an idea about some of the issues coming out, and the director who leads on that work will be available to answer questions for that. So that's all I was going to say on the report. I'm happy to take any comments or questions.
Thank you. Could I just, when you're looking at subsidiaries, does that include joint ventures, or that is just basically ODS and what's now called Ox Place, but the housing company?
Yeah, it's just the latter. We don't, unless we haven't done any specific work on joint ventures this year, so just be the companies.
Thank you. Any questions on situations? Please, Chris.
Yeah, just a small one really. On I'm looking at page 102 here, where there's the line which says around embedding net zero into decision making. It'd be good to get an assessment of how widespread that as an issue is, because I think it uses the phrase in several decision making processes. Yeah, that would be helpful to get a sense of the assessment of how widespread that is.
Okay, I'm going to come on to that if you don't mind when we do the progress report, because I was going to give a bit more detail because we talked specifically about the environment areas there. So if I don't answer your question at the end of that, please come back to me.
But thank you very much. I think we again note that report and then proceed to the progress.
Okay, so the progress report, we are, as I said, we've completed our work for 21-22. We are getting 22-23 underway. So a number of audits have been scoped and field work underway. We have had a slight delay on our side because of the sickness of Yasmin, but she will hopefully be back next week, and that will start generating some more work. The main part of the progress report is around this report on the environment. So we've given moderate assurance on both the design and effectiveness of the controls. And we're noting a number of good things. I mean, clearly, and members will know this, you've set clear targets in terms of what you want to achieve on net zero, both the council as a whole and the city. We've noted a very positive tone from the top. It's being driven with strong leadership, which is good to see. You have your citizens assembly on climate change, good progress in putting together your plans, a net zero steering group, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, lots of good things there, and lots of things we actually think are good practice for other councils to follow. If I was going to sum up what was coming out of our findings, and there are quite a lot of findings, it's really about taking you to the next level. So having had all these plans, how do you turn them into concrete action and make sure they're embedded in all of your processes so that you really drive this forward? So I'll perhaps go into a bit more detail, particularly as the councillor asked around some of the issues. So we were finding that actions weren't always quantified or allocated to specific teams. That there was some overlap between your carbon management plan and your net zero plan, that there wasn't really any specific reporting against some of the actions that you need to do. So if we take, for example, your sustainability group, didn't have a very clear terms of reference, no minutes, no formal minutes taken of the meeting, no action log, no regular reports from services, no specific financial monitoring. I'm expanding on what's in the report. So, I mean, you've just got the recommendations, but it's just to give you a sense of some of the things that were coming through. And then other issues was about, you know, just having a more formal link to some of your key documents like your medium-term financial strategy, your local plans, your service plans, ensuring that the carbon impact assessment is part of your formal decision making. So, for example, when you're agreeing capital projects, you know, really look at that in a structured way. We're finding with environmental impact assessments, they weren't always taking place, or perhaps weren't taking place early enough, so you weren't really considering them before you'd narrowed down some of your options. And we also saw there was a need perhaps for better support around the whole carbon strategy around IT and resourcing as well. So there's a very large number of issues, but you know, the council itself is on the case. It's already taking action on a number of these. I think we've got a good action plan agreed, and obviously we'll come back and report on progress against that. But wanted to give you a sense of, you know, there is a lot there that we found, but also a lot of good practice.
I can see, well, you've been talking to officers who've come and sat at the table at the end who are working in the area. Do you want to respond? Maybe introduce yourselves for people who don't know who you both are.
Sure, yes. I'm Mish Tower. I'm Head of Corporate Strategy for the Council, and Environmental Sustainability comes under my brief, and I'm joined by Rose Dickinson, who is our carbon overall zero carbon manager and who essentially drives the programme that that has been audited here. The audit follows a presentation which we did to scrutiny back in January, which sort of tracked progress against the zero carbon action plan for the council. And I think that there are a number of comments that came from the scrutiny recommendations, which you know, we're absolutely justified about the need for more rigor in terms of some of the target setting and measurement and so forth. And frankly, the work of the audit's been very welcome in that respect. So it was a very tight turnaround, it has to be said. And so I think people will see that, you know, we haven't been able to give as full responses as I think we would expect to in due course on some of these things. But what we have done is we have set a very sort of clear action plan which Rose has got a copy of it here. I mean, we've set out a clear plan that sits behind the sort of responses you can see on the recommendations to sort of put in place some of these things, you know, including areas like the governance that have just been referenced, costings in terms of those programs that we can develop costings for, and so on. So lots to do, but this is helpful basis on which to proceed.
Can we expect sort of a more, I don't know what the word is, more detailed, more considered response to these recommendations from the internal auditor?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we'll be anyway doing, and we're committed to do from the scrutiny meeting earlier this year, was to provide an updated zero carbon action plan for the council. So in producing that document, we'll take on board a number of the recommendations here. And yes, we would be happy to sort of report back to this committee progress that we're making in terms of the action plan that we're putting together now.
Would it be unrealistic to expect something at our next meeting, or do you need a bit more time?
I mean, we can certainly report on progress made by that point, albeit, you know, a number of these actions span, you know, a great amount of time. I mean, for example, creating a sort of proper costed carbon management plan, we targeted essentially budget time February. So that's the point at which hopefully we'll be able to provide that information and a number of other sort of dates set with a mind to the linkages with so many other things that the council is doing. I mean, these were not responses that the sustainability team alone is able to provide. We have to engage with all bits of the council to be able to do this effectively.
No, not at this point. Thanks.
Any questions from the committee? I had maybe just one, which is not actually on this particular item, but I was looking at recommendations, and there are a few that have been pushed back in terms of deadlines. And I noted one or two of them, and I jotted down. There was some comment about limited capacity. I think this was in relation to insurance, Alison Nash. I just wonder, I don't know whether it's Bill or yourself, Nigel, who can respond. But if there is limited capacity, just a pushback from April to August. I mean, we've had before experience of just pushes back and then they're pushing back again. Is this a realistic deadline?
Yeah, I think, Chair, it's a reasonable challenge. I think we had discussed basically the pushing back of that to September. So I'd correct that to September 22. I think it's fair to say that we don't have a great deal of capacity in insurance, basically. And at the moment, we are going through tendering for the contract, basically, which is a significant piece of work in itself. So I think Bill and Greg will confirm that we had agreed that would be changed to September 22. But it clearly hasn't been changed in this report. But that's correct, Bill, isn't it?
That is correct, yes.
Sorry, thank you very much. I mean, may we note, I mean, one of the things which has been mentioned briefly, and maybe now isn't the time to discuss it, is about the appointment of a non-committee member, if you like, an outside person to sit the Redmond commission recommendation. Do you have any comment on where that stands at the moment?
Well, we're waiting for, the government has announced its intention that it will be a requirement, but we're waiting for the detail behind that. But we did, I can't remember if we presented it to this committee, but we brought out a paper just around some of the considerations you should be thinking about when you appoint an independent member. So it might be something we could bring back to the next meeting. It might generate a bit of discussion. We're seeing some, interesting things happen at different authorities. Some are finding it have already started the process and finding it relatively easy to find people. Others are really finding it very difficult, and getting good people to do that kind of work for not very much money is a challenge. So, but we can talk about that perhaps in more detail in the next meeting.
I mean, shall we, you mentioned it, Ros, shall we ask for this paper to be tabled for the next meeting?
I mean, yes, it has been discussed. I think I remember discussing it when I first came on this committee, in fact, actually. So Nigel's nodding, he remembers. I mean, it's something that I'm particularly keen. I think that we should have an independent person to help us with interrogation of audit and governance. So it would be useful if that's not too much trouble. And you can fit it in on our agenda, Chair, too.
And it would be good at that time, since you will have some track record of experience, pluses and minuses, so at least we know the pitfalls where there are pitfalls and so on. That would be very helpful, if I may suggest. I mean, may we, we're proceeding nice and quickly. I think we're coming to the point, unless members have some other questions to raise, where we should proceed to private confidential session. I've got to read the form of words, but first of all, may we proceed to do so, and I will. Okay. We had actually strayed into the follow-up report. Have we not done so? Have I jumped ahead?
Well, I was happy with that discussion. I mean, actually, there has been very good progress in clearing quite a few of the recommendations, but you focused on the ones that have yet to be done. But I was happy that that's been covered.
Okay, so with your agreement, may we then note it, please? Thank you. And I have to read at this point, we need to pass a resolution in accordance with the provision of Section 100A (4) of the Local Government Act 1972, specifying the grounds on which the presence of outside people would involve likely disclosure of exempt information. And therefore, may I have the support of this committee, please, to turn off the live stream now and move into confidential session. I see everyone agreeing. Thank you very much.